VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. I have a couple of items which we call housekeeping items of very importance, and I hope that many of you will listen carefully. First of all, we are honored because a number of other networks carry Crosstalk, and we want, as we've said so many times, please be supportive of your radio stations or your networks wherever you hear Crosstalk. And we will outline from time to time when they are having their share-a-thons. And I want you to know that Rejoice Network, the Rejoice Radio, which is serving many, many listeners, is having their share-a-thon. And all I can say is support them. Support Rejoice Network if that's what you're listening to out there, and stand with them as the days of opportunity to share the Word of God are before us. And so we thank God for the Rejoice Network that carries Crosstalk. And if you're among the Rejoice listeners, stand with them. Item number 2. Many in our network, network listeners, okay. Many of you listen to Martha Reed Garvin, who is a soloist who airs a live-produced program or live-recorded program. And today we received a memo in the mail, and it was signed from Martha Garvin. And it says, and I'm going to read this very quickly. It says, "Sorry to bother you with this. Am presently in Spain with my ill cousin. She's suffering from a kidney disease and must undergo kidney transplant to save her life. I'm deeply sorry for not writing or calling you before leaving. The news of her illness arrived to me as an emergency and that she needs family support to keep her going. I hope that you understand my plight and pardon. Kidney transplant here is very expensive, and so I want to transfer her back home to have the surgery implemented here. Any wondering that it may be of any assistance to me, I need about $2,000 to make the necessary arrangement. I travel with little money due to the shortness of time. I had to prepare for this trip. I never expected things to go the way it is right now. I'll surely pay you back once I get home. I need to advise that there has to be operated on time to avoid from things going wrong. I will really appreciate whatever amount that you can come up with. If not at all, get back to me ASAP. Signed, Martha Reed Garvin." Well, we called up Martha Reed Garvin, who happens to not be in Spain, and she doesn't have a sister who is ill, and she doesn't need a kidney transplant. And this is what we call a scam. And when somebody's email is scammed, and may I say on the AOL system, this is very common. And so may I suggest that if you hear anything or hear talking about this, and Martha Garvin, I'm sure, would sit right here next and say, "Amen, this is a scam, it is false," and somebody under her name, and using even the manipulation of some letters to make it look like it is coming from her. So please be advised, Martha Reed Garvin is not in Spain with an ill cousin. But we share that with you because it is so easy for someone to take email and turn it backwards, turn it upside down or inside out, and then bring false messages as well. False, I mean scandalous things said over the names of certain people. So enough said. Just want to give a word to the wise is sufficient. Now, today we're going to be talking about, well, the issue of guns. And the reason I say that, because there's a lot of issues that will be governing the guns that we have, that you have, that I have, in the future, unless we're aware of this. Now, there are few people that are better informed than Larry Pratt, who is the executive director of Gun Owners of America, and he's a very good friend. And he's with us. And it is so good to have you with us, Larry. God bless you.
Well, Vic, you too. Thank you so much for having me with you.
Well, as you said even during the break, these are days when we need to depend on the Lord, right?
Every day's news makes me realize just how much we depend on His mercies, which hopefully continue to be new every morning, and His compassions will fail not.
Amen.
Because we are desperately in need of them.
Well, Larry, this morning 2 U.S. border agents were shot. One killed during a major drug corridor, near a major drug corridor in Arizona. And while there are many details that will be forthcoming, we're approaching the second anniversary of the death of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, which opened the door to the investigation into Operation Fast and Furious. However, the names and the faces of hundreds of Mexican victims have largely remained unknown until now. Now, Larry, a new report's come out from Univision. What is Univision, and what does that report reveal?
Well, Univision, or Univision, as it's pronounced in Spanish, is a mainly Mexican network. It's probably got a dominant market share of Spanish-language viewers in the United States, as well as wherever else they're aired. Technically speaking, it's a first-class network. It's very well produced, and you wouldn't know the difference except for the language looking at Univision's news or looking at CNN. And philosophically, I would say that would also be the case, not just the technical excellence of the presentation. Mm-hmm. And Univision, interestingly, because the whole Mexican response has been rather muted, and the best guess that I've read is that the Mexican government has not been all over the gringos for killing so many of their citizens, their nationals, because they get a whole bunch of money from Uncle Sam in Washington. And so they really haven't been jumping up and down. An occasional state official, I think for a while their attorney general in Mexico City had said a couple of things, but really you'd have to look pretty hard to find the official response. But Univision has provided coverage, and let me see where I guess it was last week, toward the end of in fact it was Sunday, beginning of this week. They ran an hour-long special on Fast and Furious. And one of the things they did, it was fleeting, but they showed the actual faces of the dead bodies that were littering Mexico's streets and buildings. So they put some real flesh and blood on the face of Fast and Furious. We're not just talking numbers now. We're talking about that dead guy. And they're the ones that brought to light the raid, which I'm still not sure why it would have occurred. Maybe somebody went against the cartel on a drug deal, I guess. But there was a party of teenagers, 16, 17 years old, and a whole bunch of them were killed. And an even larger number were wounded. And it turned out, as is the habit of the many assailants in Mexico, they drop their gun after they've committed the crime, probably when they figure they're far enough away to be out of retaliatory danger, because they don't want to get caught with an AK-47 or something like that, perfectly legal here in the United States, but it would be big jail time in Mexico. And that's why we've been finding Fast and Furious guns at or near crime scenes where they've been used. So we know that the attack on the young people's party, I guess some of them might have been in their early 20s now that I think about the visuals of it, they were victims also of Fast and Furious. So
the guns were actually traced back to Fast and Furious then?
Correct. And, like good little Nazis, the folks operating Fast and Furious were keeping a record, a detailed record, which is what the Nazis did, keeping a detailed record of the serial numbers of the guns that had been allowed to walk, that had been allowed to get into the hands of the Sinaloa cartel, which pretty much had the monopoly of receipt of at least the Phoenix sector's Fast and Furious gun walking. Now, we know very little, but we also know that there were similar Fast and Furious programs in Texas. There was something similar in Florida, where literally containers were shipped to Honduras, evidently for the end use of the cartels. I'm not sure if it would have been Sinaloa, because a different cartel would have been on the Mexican border with Honduras. At least that's their territory. But whatever, the United States government, from about, I'm guessing, I think I'm remembering right, August, September of 2009, they operated Fast and Furious until it blew up in their face in January, February of last year. So for give or take a year and a half, the United States government was intentionally having guns get into the hands of cartels in Mexico. And we know from documents that were submitted into the record by whistleblowers, it was for the explicit purpose of making it easier to argue for gun control in the United States. Those bad gun owners, they're the ones that are so reckless. They're the reason guns are getting into the hands of the Mexican cartel. That shows you we need more gun control in the United States. Well, now that the scandal has broken into public, at least if you don't have to depend on your news for ABC and NBC in particular, to a considerable extent CBS as well, Fox has been the only consistent major news source that has been covering Fast and Furious. So if you're part of the American public that still depends on the Democrat media, you really may not know anything. When you hear Fast and Furious, what is this, an angry sprinter in the Olympics? Is that what we're talking about? You wouldn't know. But now Univision has itself become a news item. The fact that they ran this hour-long special, which was really quite well done, the parts that I saw, that's been commented somewhat on by media in this country. So it's getting a little embarrassing for our Democrat media if the Mexican media, no right-wing news source there, are devoting hour-long specials to Fast and Furious and showing the human dead face of Fast and Furious. Hopefully that's going to shame our Democrat media into doing what you've been doing all along. I remember last year this thing wasn't out in the public domain. I was going to say the news, but I corrected myself. But it was in the public domain because we put it there last January, last day of January. And I'm almost certain that was the first national news coverage. It was on Fox. It was with Megyn Kelly. And then thankfully, we have talk radio, and in particular the powerful network that you all have at VCY. That means a lot of Americans began finding out about it before the rest of the country had a chance.
We're going to be right back in 60 seconds with Larry Pratt, the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, talking about the ongoing thing that has never seeming to go away, Fast and Furious, and now others being injured by those guns that were put there. By who and when and who knows? We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what do our tears do?
Chris, our tears primarily cleanse the eyeball of unwanted irritants like dust particles, and they keep the eye from drying out. Each time we blink, the eyelids spread a thin film of tears across the eyes. It stays intact for about 30 seconds or so, until it's time to blink again. Actually, the chemistry of the tear must be just right so that the tear molecules attract one another and maintain the film. Water will not do it. Actually, the tear itself is a marvelously well-designed system. It also contains a host of antimicrobial proteins which help avoid infection. Of course, excessive tearing is due to emotional or physical stress and helps stabilize these systems. Chris, even our tears are amazing creations. God created even them back in Genesis.
For a free information packet on creation, please call 1-800-7-GENESIS.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where our guest today is Larry Pratt, the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. And, of course, we cannot forget what has gone on with this thing called Fast and Furious and the allegations and the issues. In fact, a lot of pressure's been brought to bear on, Eric Holder. I mean, this is the top cop in the United States, and even after finding him in contempt of Congress, why is it nothing seems to happen, Larry?
Well, it actually has, but again, we were before the break, we were talking about how the Democrat media just chooses to largely ignore the story. Mm-hmm. My guess is that most people, if they're depending on ABC and NBC in particular, and even to a considerable extent CBS, don't know that Eric Holder was found in contempt of Congress, let alone that within a month following that vote, House attorneys went over to the federal court for the District of Columbia and filed criminal and civil complaints against the Attorney General, asking the court to demand documents that they've been seeking that he won't divulge, so that either he divulged the documents or that he be found in contempt of court, which, if that were to happen before, during, or after the election, you get found in contempt of court, you go to jail. Now, my guess is that if it comes to that, the Attorney General would rather be in contempt of court and even perhaps in jail on contempt of court charges rather than risk the several lifetimes that he could conceivably be in jail if the documents were surrendered that the House Oversight Committee has been seeking. That may show that he was complicit much more than has been admitted by any of the people testifying from the Justice Department. It may mean that they were committing other perjuries than we knew about already. That could be some really serious trouble for this administration. And I think that the political ramifications of having the Attorney General facing the prospect and then perhaps the reality of a contempt of court citation is what is making the administration simply refuse to play ball. And no matter what the cost of a contempt citation, my guess is because they're willing to risk that, it tells me there must be a whole lot of trouble in those documents.
Well, you know, and when you see some of them redacted, some of them are over 3/4 of the page is all black ink.
Well, in fact, at the hearing, there were apparently several hundred, because we are talking of the over 100,000, well over 100,000 documents, some, I don't know, maybe 10,000 or so have been supplied. Several, and I forget how many Chairman Issa said, but he held up at the dramatic point as he is talking sternly to Ronald Weiss, the uncooperative witness who committed perjury that day. He said, "You talk about cooperation with this committee?" And he held up this page that, except for a little white margin around the very fringe of the page, all the way around, it was totally blacked out. You call that cooperation?
Oh, goodness.
It was show and tell of the most dramatic sort, I assure you.
Well, Larry, is this charge of being in contempt of Congress, where is it? Where did it go? Does it just vanish or vaporize or what?
Well, there is a docket in the federal court for the District of Columbia. One of the reasons why civil as well as criminal charges were filed is that they knew that the criminal charge would not even come up on the docket until next year. It's about a year behind because of its backlog in the criminal area. The civil area has a much shorter backlog, but it does have one. But the possibility is altogether real that they will come up to the case of, I don't know how it might be designated, probably United States House of Representatives versus Eric Holder, Attorney General of the United States. And that case would then be on the docket. The prosecutor would be an attorney designated by the House or a team of attorneys designated by the House to prosecute Attorney General Eric Holder, who normally in federal court would be the prosecutor himself, but now would be the defendant. That still could come up before the election. That's going to be even harder, although not impossible, for the Democrat media to obfuscate, to cover up, to ignore. They've been so good at it so far. They've been very well practiced in ignoring the 800-pound gorilla in the political room, which is our government conspired to get people murdered. They knew that was going to happen. That they were satisfied. The head of the ATF during the operation of this horrendous program would express pleasure when regular reports were given to him that the murder rate in the part of Mexico where they were operating was increasing. So, yeah, it's that grisly, it's that horrible. And if the American people ever get the full reality presented to them, unvarnished by the Democrat media, then I think we've got something that could break this election loose. The second part of the same thought is Mitt Romney really could do himself a favor in the debates by saying, Mr. President, why have you not fired Eric Holder yet? Why is he still the Attorney General after all we have heard about all that his department had to do? Because we don't know for a fact yet that he was directly involved in the development and operation. At some point, he becomes liable simply because he didn't fire, and he has yet to fire. Well, they did finally let a couple of guys go, and one guy, a third guy, had his name sent over for prosecution to the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. But that only was announced the day last week, I think it was Wednesday or Tuesday, that the report was made public. He didn't do diddly until that point. So we've got some real good questions that Mr. Romney could ask, and I think it would put the president on the defensive. You've seen how he can get furious, and his face goes into a stony glaze or glare, I'm not sure which, and I think this could throw the president off track, because I don't think he's expecting nice guy Romney, however nicely he asked the question, asking the question about why didn't you get rid of the guy that was in charge of a conspiracy to commit murder.
Larry, today a story came out from CNS News that stated that from 2008 to fiscal 2011, the federal government increased foreign spending by 80%. That's 80%. And in fiscal 2011, it spent 76% more on foreign aid than it did securing the borders of the United States. Now tell us what's happening with the UN Small Arms Treaty as well.
That treaty is dead for the moment because Harry Reid, I think, finally might have picked up the telephone and, well, apparently even Democrats don't get to talk to the president. You talk about somebody that's aloof. Our president is aloof. He has had not, I believe I'm correct, not one meeting with his own Democrat caucus in either house. The Democrats are quite unhappy with this refusal to communicate. Obama is just out on his own, and whether he's too busy on the golf course to get together with him, or more likely, since you can communicate from anywhere, if you're the president of the United States, that's not a problem. If you don't communicate, it's because you don't want to communicate. And that's what's got the Democrats, forget the Republicans, the Democrats are really ripped about that. And so this is making it harder and harder for the Democrats to keep a straight face. And if it weren't for the Democrat media, I think this thing would have led to party internecine fighting by now, because people would be pointing at each other and saying, how could you have done something like that? They want to make sure they don't get any of the blame for this thing. This is an issue that absolutely cries out, first of all, for justice for those dead Mexicans and the dead Americans and the dead people yet to come by people using guns our government gave them, criminals that our government handed over guns to. But secondly, after we've considered the cry for justice, this is politically something that I think could sink the Obama administration. Sure, the economy's on so many people's mind because so many people we know are unemployed or underemployed. But conspiracy to commit murder? Pleasure that people were getting killed in Mexico? That is so over the top. I mean, even Hitler and Stalin kept their mass murdering from the public. People kind of knew, but they didn't, it wasn't in the papers. It wasn't being talked about. If you knew, it's because maybe somebody you knew or you yourself worked in the same town where they were burning Jews in ovens or something like that. But here we're talking about something that you can know, and many people do know. And I think all Romney has to do is light a match, and that gallon of gasoline is just going to go boom.
Larry Pratt, our guest today, is the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. That's the GOA. And we're talking about, of course, Univision doing American media's job in Fast and Furious. And if you want to see the evidence that the American mainstream media has protected the Obama administration when it comes to Fast and Furious, it's out there. You can see it. There are websites where this type of support and encouragement has become top issue. Our telephone number, we're going to open our phone lines here before we come to the break. If maybe you'd like to talk with Larry, you're a gun owner, we will give you a number right now that you can call. 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. Our telephone lines are already starting to flash, and as we think of the issues that we're facing these days, the issues that are America, we're going to have to, when we come back from the break, Larry, we want to hear you tell us what's happening with the UN Small Arms Treaty, which is a very important issue to many of us. And so, by the way, if you want to go to any of our programs and watch them later, you go to crosstalkamerica.com, crosstalkamerica.com, and click on the icon there, and you can listen to any program that we've done in the past. Watch it on TV. That's crosstalkamerica.com. Hope that many of you will take that opportunity. Right now, we're going to take a pause and return in just 60 seconds. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Radio Network. We'll be right back.
On a national level, the Secretary of Defense has warned of cyber terrorism and the devastation such an attack could bring. On a personal level, computers and the Internet continue to revolutionize the way we live. But is our increasing dependence on these technologies stealing our privacy and setting us up for a devastating fall? In the book Cyber Meltdown, biblical apologist Ron Rhodes addresses Bible prophecy and the imminent threat of cyber terrorism. He examines what a cyber attack in the U.S. would look like. What new technologies seem to be paving the way for fulfillment of end-times prophecies in the Bible? How terrorists and opposing nations are using cyberspace as a weapon? How computer viruses spread and personal privacy has been compromised? To obtain your copy of Cyber Meltdown, send a donation of $17 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53208. To donate by phone, call 1-800-729-9829.
We have much to talk about today. Many of you may have opinions on whether or not this Fast and Furious thing is going to affect the image of the president at this time. Many of you are probably waiting for answers to the dilemma that America is not aware of. And Larry, as we look, first of all, we think of Fast and Furious, where these guns that were run at that point in time that were walking ultimately took the life of a border guard. But now, let's look at this one. Almost entirely missing from the debate surrounding the anti-U.S. attacks in Libya is the administration's policy of arming jihadists to overthrow the Mideast government. But in the case of Libya, the arming of jihadists may have directly resulted in the 9/11 attack against U.S. consulate in Benghazi and subsequent murder of our ambassador. Any thoughts on that?
We played into a destabilization effort, and it resulted, and it was predictable, and there were many that did predict what would happen, namely that the Muslim Brotherhood was the only well-organized political entity in Egypt, especially, but in Libya as well, and that what we did, especially to get rid of Mubarak, people who were knowledgeable, like Robert Spencer, who's written a marvelous book called Did Muhammad Exist? And his conclusion is probably not. Anyway, this was such high risk. It was so easy to know that the Muslim Brotherhood would be the one to take advantage. We saw they had 2 or 3 rounds of elections in Egypt, and we saw the gathering force of the Muslim Brotherhood. They may have been a minority of popular opinion in Egypt, but they were the ones that got the pluralities and were the ones that were able to take control of the government. Then they defanged the military, which at that point was still anti-Islamist, anti-Muslim Brotherhood. And now the powers that the military had to control the government have been removed, again, by a government. It was almost like the Soviet Union all over again. The Bolshevik, which means majority in Russian, were actually a very small minority. But they were the ones who managed to drive everybody out of the political arena, and they took over and arrogated to themselves the name majority, because I guess even if you're only 25%, when nobody else everybody else is too afraid to be around, you then become the majority because you chased everybody else out. Well, that's really what was going on in Egypt, and it's as if the folks in the White House have no historical knowledge. I don't think they're that ignorant, by the way. I think my personal opinion is that because of the way we know the president was educated, particularly as a teenager, the president is doing everything he can to, quote, bring America down a peg. He thinks that America is a powerful country because the Marxist motif that framed his education has it that, well, we stole everything, and we have it coming that we be forced to give it back, that we be impoverished, that we be made like the rest of the world. Not that the rest of the world be built up, but that we be taken down.
Larry Pratt is our guest today on Crosstalk. He's the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Larry, is there a way that people can become more aware of your publishing and your situations as you face them?
Well, what we would most especially invite people to do is go to gunowners.org, and when they're on the front page, there's a red button they can click to get on the alert list, and typically weekly an email will be sent out, and it will deal with what's going on in Capitol Hill, and it will have in that alert embedded an email that can be easily sent off to the appropriate member of Congress. And that's been one of the most effective ways we have had to remind the Congress week after week that the gun owners are an alert, knowledgeable, active part of their constituency. And politicians have been learning over the last couple of decades that in a close election, which this one could be, it's the Second Amendment vote that can move the needle one way or the other to victory or defeat for a Republican candidate to win and a defeat for the Democrat, because the Democrats at the national level have now become, with very few exceptions, anti-Second Amendment.
Larry, our phones are going now, and we're going to go to Ashland, Wisconsin, and talk to Lat. Lat, you're on the air with Larry Pratt.
Yeah, hi, Larry and Vic.
Yes.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. I want to just let your callers know that a lot of these guns that are going for the Fast and the Furious, I've been doing some research on the internet about this. I don't know if you remember when Obama ran for president back in 2008, he said that he wanted to make a privatized military as strong as our federal military, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. And what I believe, and from the research I've been reading, that a lot of the guns that are being sent down there are getting sent down there for a privatized military for Mexican people, that when martial law goes into effect, when this economy does finally collapse, that our own military and police, when they won't go against the American people and lock them up against the Constitution, that he will have his own military coming out of Mexico to harbor and go after the American people.
Well, actually, even less indirect than that scenario. Obama had talked during the campaign, he's been pretty quiet about it since then, a civilian, what did he call it, civilian defense force, I think. And from the way he described it, it would have been something comparable to our armed forces. And I think your basic insight is correct, that Obama, who hates the military and has been slashing its budget in a jaw-dropping fashion, realizes that he can't rely in the main on the military. Most of the military, officer and enlisted alike, are people who really do respect the Constitution, and that's something that Obama doesn't share with them. His mentors taught him to hate our Constitution. And so if he's going to offset the generally pro-Constitution thrust of the thinking of the military, he's got to have his own independent source of a group of gaull-lighters. And I think that's where he would head rather strongly and rapidly if he were to be reelected. That would be one of the couple of things that I can think of, that he could do a Bill Clinton gun ban without legislation in view of the unconstitutional and illegal way he's been willing to rule by executive order already. And, I don't know if we have time. I could later on maybe spell it out. Sure. But this is a dangerous guy, and I think you have put your finger on something that's very key. He would like to have a source of power independent of force, of armed force, that would be responsible to him, that would take an oath of support to him, like they do in most other countries of the world, to the head of state, rather than to the Constitution, which is over the president and which he hates.
We're going to go right now to Toledo, Oregon. Toledo, Oregon, we're going to talk with Paul. Paul, you're on the air.
Oh, yes, sir. I was wondering about a civil lawsuit against Eric Holder and the DOT, Department of Justice, from the victims of the Border Patrol fellow that was killed and the other one that was wounded. I wonder if something like that is possible to...
Brian Terry's family. Brian Terry is the fellow that was the Border Patrol agent that was murdered by cartel smugglers using one of the Fast and Furious guns in December of 2010. His parents have been, and maybe the whole family, have been pursuing litigation in federal court for damages. And the courts have not been cooperative. The parents' suit has encountered numerous obstacles. They're still pursuing it, and it may yet prevail. So your thinking is something that they've already been doing, but you can be excused for not knowing about it because, again, the Democrat media is not going to talk about a cop's family suing the cop shop.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Mike in Bayview, Wisconsin. And Mike, you are on the air with Larry Pratt.
Yes, the only thing that worries me is he's got all of these prisons and outposts for the used to be in the service places, and now they've ordered hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition. I'm just wondering when they're going to start grabbing people up off the street, pro-lifers, anybody that's against their agenda, and start throwing them into these prisons, gone and never seen again, with no representation. And how do you feel about that?
Well, don't expect it before the election. But here's what's troubling about what you're talking about. If the ammunition had been purchased, even perhaps in those quantities, and it had been ammunition that would be typical for use in target practice, okay, then if they say it's for target practice, that's plausible. This is anti-personnel ammunition. This is ammunition designed to produce shock and down the target as quickly as possible.
Hollow points.
Hollow points and other frangible type rounds, the kind that people who are serious about self-defense are going to have, particularly in their handguns. But you could use them in rifle ammunition as well. The kind of ammunition that our military uses is designed to, whenever possible, wound and not kill. Not because they're humane, but because downing somebody who's still alive ties up the resources. Now, maybe not in a Muslim army, but in the European armies that we had fought heretofore, they would actually devote 2 or 3 other people to take care of that wounded warrior. But if he's dead, you find out that he's got no pulse, you just keep moving, leave him there.
Right.
We've got open lines, folks. If you'd like to call, Larry Pratt, Gun Owners of America, Executive Director. Our telephone number is 800-733-9829, talking about what's going on out there. And again, getting back to this issue where, the arming of those jihadists who did this big thing at the embassy and killing our representative. And those guns, apparently, at least it's believed by some, have come from the source of weaponry that have been literally given to those to overthrow the government. Now it's turned around against us. How many cases have we seen of recent where there have been trying to train into peace officers and people to uphold the peace, and then these men turn on our teachers and slay them? I mean, it just doesn't make sense, Larry.
Well, if you expect gratitude from a true believer Muslim, you don't understand Islam. The story is told about why Thomas Jefferson bought a Quran. Our merchant marine had been afflicted by Muslims in the Mediterranean. They murdered, they robbed, sank ships. In other words, they were terrorists. So nothing terribly new, right? Well, he asked a Muslim ambassador, why are those people doing that? And the reply was, it's our religion. And that's when Jefferson got a Quran.
And folks, if that's the religion, even if some people aren't aggressive at the present time, if it's in the book, that's the whole lifestyle. We shall return. Larry Pratt, our guest.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I am Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Some within the Word of Faith, false teaching, proclaim that Jesus became a sinner on the cross. Some of them teach that Jesus had to spend time in hell because he became a sinner for us. Some teach that he had to become born again. Many take 2 Corinthians 5:21 out of context, where it says, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. We've been talking about this in our last couple commentaries. John MacArthur says, God made him to be sin. Well, what does that mean? That important phrase requires a careful understanding. It does not mean that Christ became a sinner. The above-mentioned verse, establishing his utter sinlessness, unequivocally rules out that possibility. As God in human flesh, He could not possibly have committed any sin or in any way violated God's law. It is equally unthinkable that God, whose eyes are too pure to approve of evil, would make anyone a sinner, let alone his only Son.
And welcome back to Crosstalk today, and we have Fort Scott, Kansas, calling. Tom online there, and Tom, you have a question for Larry Pratt. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. How are you folks today?
Fine, sir.
Fine. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. My question is, other than voting against Obama and praying, what else can we do? And I'll get off there.
Well, that's a good question, and I would suggest that you find out which candidates are really with us and contribute directly to their campaigns, not going through the Republican Party. The top of my list for the Senate races would be Richard Murdoch, the treasurer of Indiana, defeated Richard Lugar, probably the most liberal, I would say a socialist, nominal Republican senator, defeated him in the primary, and now is in a very tight race against a Democrat congressman for that Senate seat. Richard Murdoch is a really good guy. He's right there with the Tea Party, and he's somebody that you could just go online, and the last name spelled Mourdock. That would be my top pick. The second pick for helping directly would be Todd Aiken, the guy that was dissed and tossed aside by much of the Republican establishment. But this man has been a solid pro-Second Amendment, pro-right to life, pro-family, pro-taxpayer vote for years and years and years. He said something that was ill-advised. He doesn't deserve to lose his Senate seat that he's competing for because of a one-off statement that he quickly enough corrected. It certainly was not, I don't think, in a league with, I am so tired. I have been campaigning, I think, already in 57 states, and 2 to go still. That was one of the president's finer moments. Does that not tell us that maybe there's an intellectual disconnect there between what should have been a geography lesson and what he thinks he knows now?
Well, you know, Larry, don't forget there were 57 states.
That's right. I mean, this is Aiken was working off what had been actually taught to a lot of people at the time he would have been in school about the physiology of a rape. But the fact of the matter is he cares about unborn children, and he cares about children that are born. And he doesn't deserve to be dumped by those of us who think we need a guy who has some respect for the Constitution.
We're going to go right now to Elk River, Minnesota. We're coming short on time here with about 3 minutes left. Elk River, you're on the air.
I have never called in before, but I'm nervous, but I'd like to tell you from my heart. My husband is a 30-year U.S. Army retired. He's in his 70s, and I'm hitting 70 soon. We're from the mountains of Virginia, but we live in Minnesota. And when I became a bride almost 50 years ago, and my husband told me, he said, Sue, he said, my president, whether I care for him or not, is my commander-in-chief. I hear all this. I see a lot of hatred. I hear a lot of hatred. And as a child of God, we're going to have to go to our prayer closets. We're going to have to pray for this country. We're going to have to talk about salvation and accepting Christ as our Savior. I am scared in my spirit, not scared of this upcoming election because the Lord's done told me that He has everything under control and that He will use people to put whomever in. But He says there's going to come a great shaking in this country.
Well, I'm sure that is that we're already feeling the trembling in the country, and I think it's so important that we allow the Lord to inspire and guide us, because
Good word.
In a country such as we have, without prayer, without God's guidance, we're a ship without a compass. Elk River, Minnesota, thank you so much. Well, Larry, we're going to touch just about a minute or two left, and that was the issue of the Small Arms Treaty. Where's this thing going? It kind of sneaked in very quietly.
Well, Harry Reid has shelved it for the rest of the election year. He realized that this could cost him some Democrat senators that he relies upon to inhabit that really cool majority leader office on Capitol Hill. But I would expect, even if it were still not possible to get through the Senate next year, which I don't think it would be either, I can see that if the president were to be reelected, he could simply, in his lawless fashion, tell gun stores, you're going to lose your license, you'll be out of business the same day if you don't immediately stop selling handguns in calibers above .380 or semi-automatic rifles that can accept a box magazine. That would be the Clinton gun ban on steroids, and the dealers would have no choice but to comply while maybe taking him to court, but that court case, as you and I know, would probably last the rest of his term. And so he could really make a hurt on gun owners in this country just by issuing an edict like that. And from what we've seen him do with amnesty, with welfare, and with other areas, he'll do anything he thinks he can get away with.
Larry, we've got about 40 seconds, and wonder if you could give folks again a point of contact for more information of Gun Owners of America.
Yeah, we'd love folks to go to the website, gunowners.org, check it out, and especially to sign up to get our alerts. They're usually weekly. They deal with what's going on Capitol Hill as a rule, and they'll have an embedded email in those alerts that you can use to send off to your members of Congress and, in effect, become a very well-informed and active citizen lobbyist.
Gun Owners of America, is it .com or .org?
.org, gunowners.org.
GunOwners.org. Larry, it's always a privilege to have you with us today, and I want to thank you for taking the time to keep us informed. And we pray that God will give you wisdom in the very important role that you play.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us today, folks. The program is called Crosstalk, and if you'd like to check our website, you can even listen to the archives, crosstalkamerica.com. It's out there for you. Thanks for joining us. Tell a friend to join us each day.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.